Hello, good morning. And on behalf of the College of Education's planning team, which includes A.J. Rod and Laura Girardeau, I really want to welcome you all to our research conversation this morning with Dr. Ann Cox. Dr. Ann Cox is a professor in kinesiology with expertise in sport and exercise psychology. Our research focuses on understanding key determinants of physical activity behaviors. She's currently investigating how body image variables impact physical activity, motivation, as well as behavior. In this line of research, Dr. Ann Cox examines how aspects of body image, particularly body shape, as well as body appreciation, relate to physical activity behaviors, as well as the effect of educational programs and of physical activity, such as yoga, strength training, aerobic exercise on body image, and has completed approximately 200 hours of yoga teacher training and uses this knowledge to examine the effects of yoga on body image and physical activity. She also teaches yoga in her community. Ultimately, her goal is to apply knowledge about motivational processes and body image to create positive physical activity experiences. We thank Dr. Cox for her community engaged research. She's doing tremendous amount of work in our community, and we certainly appreciate the fine work that she does in our community. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Cox to this research conversation this morning. Thank you, Anne. Over to you, please.
Thank you. I trust you'll tell me if you can't hear me or anything goes awry on your end. All right, thank you.
We certainly can hear you very clearly, Anne.
Great.
Okay.
Great. Where to start? Thank you all for being here, especially the students in attendance. And my goal is to talk for maybe about 30 minutes. I'll try to keep an eye on time and leave plenty of time at the end for questions and discussion. I think it will flow better if you wait and save your questions for the end. So write those down when things come up during the conversation or during the presentation so that you remember those questions for later. I've really enjoyed Johnny's talk a few weeks ago. That's a hard act to follow, the first research conversation this semester. And I think some of the themes that I'll be talking about relate to some of the things that Johnny talked about. So if you heard that talk, or if you haven't, it's recorded, and that's a great one to go back and watch as well. I am going to start today talking about what embodiment is and what it means to be disembodied. And then I'm going to move briefly into the implications for health behaviors. And then the second half of the talk, I will talk about kind of this body of research that we've been conducting over the last 8 years or so related to embodiment variables and motivation. And then I'm going to close by detailing one of our current projects. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into the when, the how, and the what of becoming disembodied. So the work that I draw heavily from to frame the research that I'll be presenting is the developmental theory of embodiment. And that theory was developed by Neva Peron. And what she did to develop that theory was conducted many interviews with girls and women during childhood, during adolescence, during adulthood, and through the lifespan to really understand girls and women's embodied experiences. And I think that this quote from her work just really nicely exemplifies the changes towards disembodiment from girlhood into adolescence. So within a period of about 5 years or so, ages 8 to 13, associated with puberty, the social environment of girls changes such that they become acculturated to inhabit their bodies with diminished agency or diminished voice or volition to act as they want to, disrupted connection to desire, which means that they can't connect to either their sexual desire or their appetite or hunger, reduced self-attunement, which means that they have a diminished capacity to be aware of their mental and physical sensations or what their body actually needs, and greater self-objectification, which is a process by which they start to view themselves from an external perspective and greatly value the external appearance of their body. And I'm going to get more into some of those two terms more and more throughout the talk, so they'll become a little bit more familiar. And then the last part here, so these compounded losses, the diminished agency, the disrupted connection, the reduced self-attunement, these compounded losses undermine girls' ability to act in the world with power. And I'm going to dig into that a lot more and kind of expand on how that process happens. But let's back it up just for a moment here and talk about what is embodiment generally. Generally speaking, this idea of embodiment can be thought of as a perceptual experience of engagement of the body in the world, or the lived-in experiences of the body. We all have bodies, and it really is us interacting with the world and what that experience is like. From an embodiment perspective, the body is thought of as a place of subjectivity. It's me looking out into the world, engaging with the world, and a site that performs and shapes culturally informed practices as well. So what I'm going to show on the next few slides are 3 quotes from Neva Perron's work on the developmental theory of embodiment. And these quotes really illustrate the differences in embodiment experiences and the changes, more specifically, in embodiment experiences as girls move through girlhood into adolescence and adulthood. I just think the quotes say it all. So this first one is from Alice, 10 years old. I like movement. I feel really good playing. My body feels like you're ruling, go. I'm the best on my team. I like eating. I like pasta and broccoli, and I drink milk for calcium and protein for muscles. I'll pass on diets. Interesting that at the age of 10, she even is talking about diets, but that actually happens at even a younger age than age 10, where girls start to become aware of diets. But what's most notable in this quote, and very typical of girlhood, prior to adolescence and prior to puberty, is that embodiment experiences are generally really positive. So there's enjoyment of moving their body, and usually they participate in physical activity for the joy, for the pleasure. You'll also notice that she largely looks like she is eating to feel good and eating to fuel her body, and not restricting her eating based on diets. So this is all very positive experiences of embodiment. These next 2 quotes that I'm going to share are a little bit different. They're from a woman's perspective. So in adulthood, reflecting back to childhood and adolescence, and then currently in their adult experiences. So I was the fastest girl in my class, playing active games, and I really enjoyed that. When we turned about 12, I started hanging out more with the girls and just doing the walking, the sitting, the chatting, and the watching. I've been getting back into yoga now, which is great for body awareness. I exercise during the week. I have a pretty good cardio, and I'm pretty good with weights. So just like similarly to the last one, in girlhood, we see that there was some enjoyment. Enjoyment with physical activity, enjoyment moving her body and being in her body. But then what starts to happen is girls start to engage in more socially acceptable or prescribed activities. And what this looks like in recess time, for example, is doing a lot more chatting and a lot more sitting around and watching instead of participating in physical activity. So already we're seeing agency start to be restricted, and what's okay to do with her body starting to be restricted. And then as an adult, she's engaging in cardio. I'm pretty good with cardio, I'm pretty good with weights. She doesn't say anything about enjoying it. And these activities are socially acceptable and socially prescribed physical activities for adults. So we start to kind of define our movement in more restrictive ways. And this, of course, is true for men as well. And I do want to note that I'm focusing on the lived experiences of girls and women out of Perron's work, but certainly men and those with other gender identities have restricted agency and disembodiment experiences as well. So let me read this last one. Again, it's a retrospective, recalling back to childhood and then comparing it with today. So I was taking karate too up to the age of 12, and I thought I was so macho. I was in control. But when I was 12, I was becoming so uncomfortable in karate, being a girl, because it's puberty. I stopped doing karate. I was so disappointed because I really loved karate. And now I go to the gym and I run on the treadmill, but it's not with pleasure. I got to do my cardio because I've been eating quite a lot. So again, really consistent story that in childhood, girls enjoy moving their bodies. They enjoy being physically active. In a sport like karate that is male dominated, certain activities start to become uncomfortable for girls. They find themselves being the only girl there, or they get messages that it's not an activity that is okay for a girl to do. Now she goes to the gym, another socially acceptable and prescribed way of moving our bodies as adults, and particularly as women. And she's got to do her cardio because she's been eating quite a lot. So not only is she restricting herself to socially acceptable forms of movement, but now she's also linking it to what she eats, which is another way of restricting her behavior. So what we see in these quotes, what it's illustrating for us is a shift from positive embodiment experiences as girls through puberty, through adolescence, to more negative embodiment experiences and a different relationship with physical activity as adults. So Perron has developed what she calls the experiences of embodiment construct. This is a variable that ranges from positive embodiment to negative embodiment. And the positive embodiment looks like positive body connection and comfort. So you're connected to your body, meaning that you know how it feels. You're aware of those physical sensations and experiences. You're comfortable in your body. You feel good in your body. You also have embodied agency and passion, meaning that you feel free to use your voice, to play big, to say what you want to say, and to pursue what you want to pursue. And you have attuned self-care, which means not only are you aware of what you are feeling in your body, but then you're even able to meet the needs of your body based on what you feel there. So this could be that you're able to provide nourishment to your body when you're hungry, or water to your body when you're thirsty, or rest to your body when you're tired, or relaxation when you're stressed, or movement when your body just wants to move. And those things seem really simple, but for most of us as adults, I would argue, we aren't really aware of all of those things. And even if we aren't always good at meeting those needs. So negative embodiment is kind of the opposite of these things: disrupted body connection, where we're not aware of our body's needs and feelings and experiences. We're uncomfortable. We might be feeling shame or guilt or just embarrassment of our bodies. This restricts our agency and our passion. And we start to limit what we allow ourselves to do with respect to what we eat or don't eat, with respect to what we do or don't do with physical activity, the kinds of movement experiences we engage in or don't engage in. And this can result in things like self-neglect and harm. So, I mean, self-neglect on a more minor level means just not meeting your needs on a daily basis, or even harming yourself. So we've even started talking about what the implications are for health behaviors through some of those definitions, but I'm going to briefly go over kind of the big picture of why do we care? So what really happens when girls and women are moving into more negative embodied experiences? So the first two or three actually are pretty reflective of the definition of negative embodiment. We know that when girls and women move to experiencing more negative embodiment, they are less aware of their bodily sensations. They're less connected to things like hunger and thirst and tiredness and stress and all of those things. They have higher body surveillance. And so it's a shift from really experiencing your body from the inside to now being hyper aware of your body from the outside and wondering, what do I look like? What do I look like? What do I look like? And this can manifest in body surveillance, which is really mentally scanning the external appearance of your body all throughout the day. There's some really interesting studies on like middle school girls and how this body surveillance impacts things like math performance, because they're spending so much time during school thinking about, what do I look like to others? Reduced ability to respond to physical needs. I've talked about that one quite a bit. So I'll move on to, the bigger health behavior implications like disordered eating patterns and lower physical activity behaviors. And then finally, I'll spend a little bit more time on this last one because in our lab, we're particularly interested in the things that impact motivational processes. And negative embodiment experiences are linked with more extrinsic motivation for physical activity. So extrinsic motivation for physical activity looks more like I'm participating in order to change the shape or weight of my body. Another example would be like in order to improve my health. But with respect to these girls who are going through puberty and going through these changes, they're thinking a lot about engaging in behaviors that are going to make their external appearance look the way that they want it to look. And that's extrinsic motivation. The problem is extrinsic motivation by itself is not enough to sustain enjoyable physical activity behavior. It's linked to lower levels of enjoyment during movement, and it just doesn't sustain the behavior over time. So on the other end of the spectrum is what we call intrinsic motivation. And many of you I know are probably very familiar with this concept. Intrinsic motivation is derived from engaging in physical activity for the inherent rewards that you get from the activity. So that could be the feelings of exertion that you enjoy, the enjoyment that you get, the sense of freedom, or just the satisfaction that you get from participating in that activity during that activity. The thing with intrinsic motivation is it's what girls have before they start shifting. It's what kids have in general before they start shifting to more extrinsic. And it's the kind of motivation that is most essential for sustaining long-term physical activity behavior across the lifespan. So it's really, really important. And so this shift to negative embodiment has huge implications for girls and women's relationship with physical activity. So what are we to do as these girls are making that transition between the ages of 8 and 13 years to having more of the negative embodiment experiences? How do we support positive embodiment? How do we support that connection to themselves, or maintain that connection to themselves, or revisit that connection to themselves to positive embodiment? Well, in Perron's developmental theory, she outlines 3 really clear pathways to positive embodiment. And these provide a really useful framework for thinking about how we might develop programs or interventions that help girls feel more positive experiences. So I'm going to focus on one of the 3 today, the physical pathway. And the physical pathway is engaging in immersed and joyful physical activities. Importantly, these immersed and joyful physical activities have to be non-objectifying and non-appearance focused. So what you're going to hear, or what you're not going to hear in these activities, is anything about exercising to lose weight, exercising to burn calories, exercising to change the way your body looks. You won't hear those things. There probably will not be mirrors around you or things that would amplify your focus on your external appearance. And notably, immersed in joyful physical activity sounds a lot like intrinsic motivation, and it is. The other characteristic is that to support positive embodiment through this physical pathway is being able to move freely in an unrestricted way and being free to take up lots of space, or as much space as you want. This quote here, I think, really captures this idea of the physical pathway to positive embodiment. So I'm going to read it to you. And it is by Clarissa Estes from her book, Women Who Run with the Wolves. There is no supposed to be in bodies. The question is not size or shape or age, or even having 2 of everything, for some do not. The wild issue is, does this body feel? Does it have a connection to pleasure, to heart, to soul, to the wild? Does it have happiness, joy? And can it in its own way move, dance, jiggle, sway, and thrust? Nothing else matters. This is not from a book on positive embodiment, but it sure sounds like it. It sounds like positive embodiment more globally. And then at the end there, it really gets into the movement aspects of what positive embodiment can be. And so again, as young girls are in the crosshairs of the physical changes that are happening with puberty and surrounded by these significant social and environmental changes that are happening around them as they start to look like women, they start to lose that connection to joy and pleasure. They start to be told how to move their bodies, what's okay to move, and how exactly and how much and at what intensity they should move based on what they ate. These are really restrictive ways of approaching physical activity. And I probably don't need to say it again, but I will. These are also ways that are not going to sustain physical activity motivation or all of the wonderful health outcomes we know come with sustained physical activity. So this brings us to the journey back to ourselves. I'm going to talk a little bit about the research we've been doing now on how we might support positive embodiment and associated outcomes like intrinsic motivation, notably intrinsic motivation. And we're going to start by talking about mindfulness. So the pathway that we've been kind of taking into supporting positive embodiment and related variables is through mindfulness, which you might know is generally awareness and attention to the present moment, with elements of non-judgment, curiosity, acceptance, and openness. And we started to reason that it might be particularly important to have an awareness and attention to physical sensations and an acceptance of those sensations while you're engaging in physical activity. And that might be really supportive of some of these positive embodiment experiences and motivation. And so what we started doing was assessing and capturing what we call state mindfulness during engagement in physical activity. And when I say state mindfulness, that means the mindfulness that you are experiencing while you're moving, while you're engaging in physical activity. There's no perfect way to measure this, but what we've been doing is using a retrospective survey instrument right after people engage in a single bout of physical activity. So they engage in physical activity and then they complete a really brief survey assessing their awareness and attention to physical sensations while they were engaging in that physical activity. And here's what we found. Over the last 8 years or so, we have found that greater state mindfulness during physical activity is associated with more positive affect, which means more pleasure, more enjoyment, lower body surveillance, so less concern with the external appearance of my body, higher body appreciation, and this means a love and a respect for not only the external appearance of your body, but also the ability and function of your body. Greater feelings of autonomy and competence. I'm going to pause on this one. Autonomy is feelings of volition and free choice in physical activity, and competence is feelings of capability or ability in physical activity. Both of those are critical predictors of intrinsic motivation according to self-determination theory, which I know some of you know quite well. So not surprisingly, mindfulness is also associated with greater intrinsic motivation. So collectively, the studies that we've done, which some of which are listed at the bottom of this slide, have been completed with everyone from middle school students to late adolescents to early adulthood to middle adulthood. We've also conducted studies in multiple physical activity settings, from cardio exercise to strength training to sport to yoga to physical education. And we have conducted studies spanning really large survey-based, kind of field-based research studies, from cross-sectional to longitudinal studies that span 16 weeks. And we have also conducted experimental studies where we might actually manipulate mindfulness while participants are walking on a treadmill, for example. So we have a pretty robust body of literature now showing that higher state mindfulness in a variety of settings with a variety of types of people tends to be associated with positive embodiment experiences and adaptive motivational processes. So you'll notice that I'm not spending very much of my talk at all detailing these studies. I'm happy to talk about any of them, which is why I gave a little bit of a detail on the breadth of the studies we've conducted. But for those of you, particularly maybe the ed psych students who are out there, I'm going to throw one model at you just to show one of the studies that we did. So in this particular study, we assessed state mindfulness every other week during a 16-week yoga course that students took at WSU. So we went into their class and had them recall their state mindfulness during a yoga class every other week. And we used 4 of those indicators up here at the top in these squares as indicators of the slope of state mindfulness, which is in this pink circle. So the slope of state mindfulness across the 16 weeks simply represents growth in state mindfulness or increases in state mindfulness over those 16 weeks. And if you're interested, I also have the state mindfulness intercept over here on the left as well. And so we really wanted to know that if students were able to increase in state mindfulness over the course of a 16-week yoga class, would their motivational processes also increase? And in fact, they did. Increases in state mindfulness positively predicted increases in perceptions of competence and autonomy, which positively predicted increases in autonomous physical activity motivation, and that includes intrinsic motivation. Notably, the teacher also mattered, which indicates that some teachers actually promote more growth in state mindfulness than other teachers. And that's important because it means we can do something about the degree to which participants are having state mindful experiences. It might also be interesting to some of you to know what about trait mindfulness. So just as an aside, trait mindfulness is your disposition to be mindful in general. And we found that their baseline trait mindfulness did predict baseline state mindfulness at the beginning of the program, but it did not predict growth in state mindfulness. So that means that regardless of how much trait mindfulness you have, it doesn't matter. You can come into a mindful exercise program like yoga and you still can benefit from it and increase in your state mindfulness. All right. I hope y'all are writing down your questions. I'm almost to the end here. So, okay, I'm just a couple minutes behind. I'm going to close with detailing a study that we're currently working on. So I really do feel like this work that I've been presenting is the culmination of all of the research I've done over the past 20 years on body image and motivational processes. It kind of all comes together into this project. We don't have an official name for this program yet, but Find What Moves You is kind of the tagline we've been playing with. So that's what I'll call it. It's the Find What Moves You program. This program that we're developing is for girls ages 12 to 14. They're kind of in the thick of it. They probably had some of these disembodied experiences, and we're hoping to show them ways to keep connecting back to themselves. The mission of the program is at the bottom here, so I'll read that to you. This program is designed to empower girls to discover, embrace, and express their true self through movement, reflection, and social connection. Throughout the program, girls will learn skills that support physical, mental, and social well-being. And what's really important to us is that we identified the core experiential objectives that would help us meet that mission and lead them into these positive experiences of embodiment. So these are the 4 experiential objectives of the program. Girls practice strategies that support body appreciation. Number 2, girls engage in mindfulness practices. And I just showed you all of the empirical research backing that up. Number 3, engaging in physical activities in which they get to choose their level of participation to support autonomy and competence. And experiencing a sense of community through meaningful interactions with peers and instructors. I didn't have time to go over that, but both self-determination theory and the developmental theory of embodiment strongly endorse the role of social connection as well, in addition to these other factors. Every lesson in the program has 4 core structural elements that appear at least once in the lesson. And right now it's a 12-session lesson over the course of 6 weeks. And we really are in the midst of creating this program, so it's a work in progress. But the structural elements are every lesson will have movement, and we're intending to show a variety of movement, from cardio to strength to sport-based skills to dance to Tai Chi to yoga, all these different things to expose them to. Every lesson has self-reflection, where they might be recalling something from their past that they can link to the lesson that they're learning in that particular class, or self-reflection on how the movement is feeling in their body that day. There's always social connection, which could be large group discussions or pair share type discussions. And continuing practice. There's always some kind of homework assignment where they take the lesson and the skills that were introduced in that particular class, and they take it into their week and bring it back to the next class. And to close, and I'll go pretty quickly through these, I just brought 3 example lessons. So there's 12 lessons in total, and these are 3 of them. So the first one, focusing on mindfulness of the body, where we plan to use yoga and Pilates inspired movements to draw their attention to the internal experiences of their body and to notice how poses are making them feel so that they get that greater awareness of their body. Self-kindness, we propose using dance sequences to introduce a certain level of challenge where it might be difficult to learn the choreography, because self-kindness is something that we can give to ourselves in moments of challenge or difficulty. And it is a way of positively relating to ourselves as well as our bodies. And so we want to make it, sufficiently difficult to notice how they respond to things that are difficult, and then offer them strategies to practice self-kindness. The last example is self-care and responding to internal cues. So going beyond mindfulness of the body, now can they interpret their internal sensations? And then we'll give them some options and examples of how they might use different forms of movement, as well as other practices to actually respond to the needs of their mind and their body. So just a quick example might be learning what restorative or relaxation movement practices look like for when they're tired, and what more invigorating and energizing practices look like for when they need to increase their energy. All right, I'm gonna end there. That's my smooth ending. I wanna stop before I get to questions to thank everybody who has contributed, particularly to the last project. But first, Dr. Sarah Ulrich-French, who's my longtime dear friend and collaborator. And I think she's probably still here. So thank you to Sarah, and then all of the students who have contributed to this project. There's a lot of them, and they're all listed there. And they all work in the Psychology of Physical Activity lab. And then I do want to give a shout out. I'm going to try to do this without getting too emotional, but my family is here, and I don't think they've ever seen me give a research talk. So shout out to my mom and dad, who taught me through my basketball career to really take up a whole lot of space and to play big and to use my voice. And this is where I'm going to get emotional. Shout out to my daughter, Isabel, who really helped me on my journey back to myself by showing me how to have pure joy through movement again. And lastly, a shout out to my husband, Daryl. Sorry, I'm going to embarrass you, because he allows me to be exactly who I am. So thank you to all of you for being here. I'll gather my emotions now. And I will, I don't know, should I take this off? If you want to see a particular slide, I can just bring the slides back up as needed, but we have a good amount of time. So I really, really hope we have some good comments or questions, or come collaborate with us, come work with us. Let's hear it.
And that was great. I want to talk to you more because of just a lot of intersections there. I wonder, this whole idea of surveillance that you talk about, Michel Foucault talks about surveillance coming from a certain kind of society. And you talked a lot about physical and sort of psychological issues here. But what about social issues that are part of what young girls experience when they get into puberty? The sort of the bodily changes, of course, that you've talked about so well, but the sort of incipient patriarchy, I think, that is part of how boys look at the girls and how girls want to self-present. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Especially excited for my 13-year-old to hear more about this. Yeah, so you would love Neighbor Perron's work. She outlines this in great detail. And I think, Neva and my work, we come at it from the psychological perspective of this is what's going on around you. So we're going to intervene at the individual level. But then, yeah, there's the social level and the societal level and the cultural level. And so she talks about things like, particularly as girls' bodies start to change. I mean, everybody around them starts interacting with them in completely different ways. So everything from sexual attention or just attention in general, comments on their body. I mean, what's really interesting is the young undergrads who come and work in our lab. And I love having them because they're much more proximal to that middle school experience than I am. And the stories that every single one of them has about the discomfort in the changes of their body because of the comments that started happening or the treatment that started happening. So all of those social things are happening. In a physical activity setting, girls who go through maturity, go through puberty earlier than others, start getting looked over in terms of making sports teams because their bodies are deemed not as athletic or not as appropriate for sport participation. So they, as soon as the body starts changing, in particular, society views them as less appropriate for certain activities and more appropriate for other activities like sexual activities, right? And less appropriate for achievement, performance, and sport. And so, yeah, they start getting treated differently in a million different ways. And of course, all that messaging, as you know, is coming through all the media, all the TV shows, all, everything. I mean, we could go on and on about that. I don't know if I hit on some of the key examples, because you're right, I didn't point out what some of those specific examples are.
No, that's helpful, Anne. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's kind of, especially for the early maturing girl, it's kind of like the first comment she gets about her body starts to build that case for the body surveillance. It's like up until that point, I was just living in my body. I didn't even realize I had to think about my body from the outside. And then something happens. Actually, I talk to my students a lot about this. Like, when did that moment happen? And a lot of times it happens around the age of 8 or 9, actually, when you start to realize that, oh, what does my body look like compared to this other person's body? And up until that point, you were just playing. And also, something I didn't say is Neva Perron's work shows that we can absolutely successfully come back to that experience of being completely in our body as adults, even as older adults. So we can make that journey back with an awareness of what's going on around us and how that has impacted us. Yeah, we don't take on society. We take the easy way out and try to change the individual rather than changing society, but we need to address both.
Hi, Anne. Great job. I mean, it's really powerful, and I feel like I would like to go to those workshops to unlearn all the kind of horrible, diet culture and comments and ways that we think about our bodies, and try to get more to that place of a positive sense of embodiment. So it's just really insightful and just kind of totally different kind of research than I do. So I love it, and learning from your presentation. My question is related a bit to what AG was bringing up and your response right now. And I wondered, and forgive me if I missed this when you were sharing about the intervention and the research that you're doing now, but to what extent do you have some of those conversations about almost like what to expect? Because though you're focusing on the individual, like how they're navigating situations that they might hear comments, and instead to have so I guess I wonder about those kind of critical conversations about those potential societal expectations, or if it's more really a focus on enjoying movement, enjoying forms of exercises. And I just don't know. I just wondered if that's addressed at all, or how those conversations go with the participants.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And now you're making me feel really uncomfortable because we may have gone too far in the other direction. So historically, body image programs have done what you just said. They've really focused on that literacy, like media literacy and knowledge of, what is the messaging that we're getting? Is it true? How is it impacting us? Things like social media is photoshopped images, all of those things. But it's very cognitively focused, and it's focused on changing beliefs and resisting those messages. So like acknowledging them, recognizing, resisting them, which sounds a lot like Johnny's talk from a few weeks ago. And what was missing from those programs is, it's one thing to say, ignore that comment, love your body. And it's another thing to feel love for your body. And so that's one of my pet peeves, is like the Love Your Body campaign. The intention is great. The efficacy is really questionable. So I don't think we're not going to change our embodiment experiences through the discourse alone. So what we've really focused on, and I have another colleague who does this work purely from a yoga standpoint, and she's kind of taking the same approach now, where we need to have these embodied experiences. And of course, we're relying heavily on movement to give them these experiences, because you have to feel it, you have to do it, you have to experience it to really shift embodiment experiences. But the question that you're making me think of now that I think we need to continue to think about is, where's the balance between the discourse and the critical stance? And Neva Paran talks about this, the critical stance towards the messaging from the media and from society versus the doing. And right now, honestly, we're really focusing on the doing. And it's really hard because you want to pack absolutely everything in there, and we're already so tight, and we're like, can we effectively weave in some of those conversations as well? And it's something I'm going to keep thinking about it, but I don't know what the answer is and what the balance is.
Oh no, that's super helpful. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. This is not my work. So I mean, I think that you're finding positive impacts, and so I think that that's really, yeah. I mean, I just was wondering to what extent, but I also think you're giving critical tools,
right,
using in the now that will make them feel good and have that presence of mind when it comes to movement.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's two different approaches. Yeah. What else? Yeah, absolutely, Kathy. You know, it would be really great as I'm looking at this, Cassie, and I don't know if you have a question, is, we think about how to deliver this. This needs to be a health and PE unit. So in health, they do all the critical stance and the discourse kind of stuff. And they talk about the messaging that they're getting and the treatment they're getting and what, how that feels and what they can do to resist that. And then they get to go to PE and they get to do all the movement-based experiential kinds of things. That would be a really cool pairing.
And why do you think mindfulness is so absent in our culture, and that we have to focus on this? Because what you've given us is a lot of the there are advantages, there's pleasure, there's all this kind of thing, there's this, the kinds of things that we enjoyed in childhood are all about it. Why is it that we aren't more mindful?
Does somebody else want to take that question? That's a big question. I mean, I think that the simple, short, but big answer is the societal structures and institutions. I mean, even like you think of, we're in the College of Education, and even thinking about the school system that takes us away from the experience of learning and the aha moments to, I must get the grade. And physical activity takes us away from just the pure expression to, I need to win this game, or I need to perform at this level even, which still is not necessarily associated with sensation, is it? I think back to my athletic career and think, I don't know how often I was mindful during that. It was still outcome oriented. And then you move into adolescence and diet culture, and I must do this amount of cardio because I ate this amount of calories, and all those little things just start to eat away at it. Haley has an answer. There we go. Sarah has a good answer too. The chat is lighting up.
Right. I agree with both Sarah and Haley about that. I wonder why we have that, though. What is causing that? And I don't expect an answer. It's just sort of the kinds of things floating around in my head at the moment. So thanks for talking about it.
Yeah. Well, and people realize that, even I've been reading about Thoreau recently. Go back and read some Thoreau. He had it figured out then and had the same concerns. that long ago, he had the same concerns that society was too fast paced. There was too much information coming in, too much distraction and structure and expectations and restrictions. So we need to be intentional in going to be back in our minds and back in our bodies. Yeah, this problem isn't new. It just is in a new form. And it takes a lot of effort to resist what's around us. Like a lot of intentional effort. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that in the chat.
Hi, Ann. How are you? I
Good
just
to
want to
see
say
you.
it's good to see you. I want to say thanks for doing this today, and really great work, really important work. I think hits home for so many people. So thank you for sharing. I want to ask you just a really general question, which is about the developmental shift from intrinsic to extrinsic motivation. And today you talked about it as it relates to our perception and conceptualization of our body. But I'm wondering if you know, or what you think about the possibility that the shift from intrinsic to extrinsic motivation being something that's more general that happens, that we become more, you know, like, for example, we see this in our desire to learn and to pursue different, you know, activities, for example, from childhood into adolescence, going from intrinsic motivation, the desire to learn, versus when we get into high school or middle school into high school and then on to college, being a little bit more driven extrinsically. So I'm just wondering, is this a more general issue, or is it really specific to our body, or does it operate differently when we're thinking about our body?
Well, this is supposed to be a research conversation, so I'll invite other motivation experts in the crowd to jump in. We definitely see it with academics and physical activity, which I know the best, and with sport. So kind of regardless of the form of physical activity, we see a shift. Sarah, I don't know if you can speak to the global motivational orientations. I know less about there. Is there a global shift, or are you not sure as well? Yeah, somebody jump in. But my inclination is to say yes. I just can't think to specific research support right off the top of my head outside of academics or physical activity.
Well, let me follow that up and ask, when you're doing research and or we're talking about surveillance, and then maybe and sort of revisiting these ideas of going back into our body, does that have benefits in other domains for people too?
So is your question, if we were to like kind of tackle it in the physical domain, would it transfer to other domains?
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah. Well, we do see some relationships. What I can't think about is like, I mean, this is the work that needs to be done, right? Is actually using an experimental or an intervention type of study to see if we can actually make that change. So if we shifted in one area, shifting back, does it impact other areas? I don't have the answer. Theoretically, it could. And I feel like my own experience mirrors that, honestly, that the more, you know, because you're more in touch with your feelings and sensations and really deriving your motivation from internal sources, it feels like that bleeds over into other areas of my life. But empirically, I'm not sure we have a whole lot of support for that. We have more observational studies that show those links across domains. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
Thanks for the hard questions.
I would maybe just jump in and say that, you know, that's been a lot of our work is understanding how movement, whether it's sports or various forms of activity, how they provide such a tangible opportunity to practice these skills that do apply broadly, and that definitely have a bigger impact. So there's lots of ways in which growth and development at a global scale or a trait level is impacted by specific experiences, and that the physical domain offers very tangible ways in which we can practice, you know, things like mindfulness and self-compassion and self-care and things like that. So that's also been the foundation of a lot of work that uses those as just experiences and opportunities to practice these things that do extend, you know, beyond that context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we think there's a lot of potential in physical activity. So we welcome anybody from any of these other departments and colleges who want to come collaborate. It does provide this unique target. I mean, it's kind of why I got interested in mindfulness in movement in particular, because it provides such an interesting target for your attention. I couldn't sit and meditate before I did yoga for a number of years. Because the target of my attention was always changing, and that was more interesting than just sitting still. So yoga, Tai Chi are moving meditations and great ways, yeah, like Sarah said, to start to practice those skills.
And how much have you been hooked up with, literally hooked up with, neuroscience and other kinds of bodily researchers and, sensations and, brain chemicals and all that kind of stuff? What do these folks say? And
Not much, other than Amanda McMahon, who was my student, used an EEG device to measure mindfulness. But one of the things that's been limiting is our ability to measure mindfulness or states of attention while moving is, from what I understand, a lot more challenging, but not much at all. I'm curious where you're kind of going with that. Did you have like a specific connection or question in mind that would?
No, I was just thinking that you talked your data comes from self-reports and other things like that, and I just wondered if there was any sort of real bodily kinds of things, sensations, chemicals, and so forth that you may have measured. I'm just popped into my mind. I don't have one, but I noticed that the new Apple Watches, have all these kinds of things to measure. How are you sleeping? How are you breathing? All that kind of stuff. And I think that is probably an interesting way, these sort of accompanying technologies, to help us become more mindful.
Yeah, I know it is. I would love to work with somebody on that. The one study that's popping into my head was one that I really, really liked. Mackenzie is the first author. I can't think of his first name. And he looked at a 70 or 80-minute yoga session and assessed, I think he was only assessing heart rate, and used some metric to calculate heart rate variability. And he was able to see how heart rate variability corresponded with changes in attention and affect throughout the yoga class. And it was as you would expect. And it was really nice to see that empirical data support those physiological changes that we think should be happening with the changes in attention and affect throughout the yoga class. So essentially, as the yoga class went on, they experienced more and more pleasure, better or more diverse or greater heart rate variability, which is good, and more attention to the internal sensations of their body. And so, which they didn't measure mindfulness per se, but that's pretty close. And so essentially, as they got further into the class, more mindful, they felt better. Heart rate variability supported that. Yeah. But we haven't. So if anybody has a super fun lab with lots of toys they want to try out and can use during yoga or movement or even walking, yeah, there's a lot of potential. Nice, Shika. All right, Shika, we need to plan a project.
And I'm gonna have a conversation that we've had before. The program that you've described is addressing girls at a specific age, and based on some of the things that you've talked about how early these messages, and even thinking about how societal structure begins to impact everybody at an early age. What do you think about different age groups or developmental stages to address the disembodiment problem?
Like, when is the best time to address it? Is that the question?
I don't know. I don't want to use the word best, but
Yeah.
just talking about why that age group, and also just in the context of disembodiment, what are other stages to?
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually just flipping through Perron's book this morning, and she has, in her 2017 book, she actually breaks it down into each of those stages, like 8 to 9 years, and then the next few years, and then the next few years. And there's really specific and unique challenges and things that characterize. Of course, this is all on average, and this is not every girl's experience. We have to always say that, but there are these average experiences. And you know what it made me think about first, yeah, you and I have talked about this, and we talked about wanting the girls to be old enough that they had had some negative embodiment experiences. And by that, we just mean times when they had doubt about their external appearance, times when they felt disconnected from their bodily sensations, which certainly has happened to some extent for most girls by the ages of 12 to 14, or even just the emphasis on the external appearance of my body is more important than what I'm doing with my body. Girls are dropping out of sport at a super high rate at that age. So we see those things happening. And we wanted them to have a little bit of that experience so that as we're teaching them the tools, they have something where those tools can land. We thought like how it's difficult to like teach strategies to young girls, like self-care and body appreciation, when you haven't kind of run up against that and had a struggle with that yet. So we want them to have some experiences that they can draw from and then apply the strategies to. Because it's going to happen. I don't know a woman, I have yet to meet a woman who has had no doubts about the external appearance of her body at some phase. What it's making me thinking is back to that earlier question from Catherine about the cognitive strategies and the resisting, like, should that maybe come earlier? I'm just like brainstorming here now. Should that come earlier where they're like, oh yeah, I am seeing this stuff around me, or I'm starting to, or here's what's coming. We try to protect, or when I had a daughter at first, I was like, do I just protect her from all the stuff? Do I not show her these TV shows, or do I let her just see it all? Because she's going to see it all at some point. And will she be better equipped at some point to see that all than earlier? Because it shows up in cartoons you show your 3 and 4 year olds. I mean, it's there everywhere. So yeah, that's the rationale for why we chose the 12 to 14 year olds. Oh boy, if you get into like the 15, 16, 17 year olds, we even still, because of the way we've been raised, feel uncomfortable going there, but you might have to start talking about the sexual desire stuff and how that's really, really restricted and not discussed when it comes to girls versus boys. That's a big part of Neva's theory as well, that gets really restricted. So you might be having different kinds of conversations with those later high school girls than you would with 12 to 14 year olds. I don't know. You have anybody want to jump in there? Lexi, I'm looking at you.
I do it. Well, Sarah, thank you for asking that question, because the thing that popped into my head was the parents of these adolescents. And, full disclosure, my interest is primarily in adults and looking at some of these theories in adults. So particularly based on what you mentioned earlier, Anne, is how much your daughter has reconnected you to your body. And so just if you had any consideration of including parents within this intervention.
I'd love to know what you think about that. I really want to interview parents as part of the development of the program in particular, but I haven't thought too much about like what their like official involvement would be as part of the program. And we are in development, so anything is fair game at this point.
Well, I look forward to chatting. We'll chat later. I'm excited.
Okay. Yeah, because yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm going to hand it back to AG.
Well, thank you so much, Anne. That was really stimulating. I have more questions, I'm sure others do, but we know where you are and we know how to find you. So great job and congratulations. I wanted to just alert folks to the next and final research conversation of the fall. We'll also have 3 in the spring, but that will be with Young Che Ri on December 1st around 12:10 on Zoom, and you'll see more information on that coming up. So thank you very much. Thank you, Anne.
Thanks for all the great questions.